Kia ora, I'm Amy. I was supervised by Margaret Stanley and also working with Keiko Hashiba, looking at the traits of recently naturalized plant species in Aotearoa and also doing some fun field work. The traits I was looking at were fruit type, shade tolerance, and dispersal modes across 70 species that were casual occurring in 2006, but naturalized as of 2020. Of introduced species, those that are casual occur only close to parent plants or just occasionally in the wild. They can then become naturalized when they have self-maintaining wild populations, and then a subset of these can then become environmental weeds, which means they impact native biodiversity. Environmental weeds are only a small proportion of the large source pool of introduced species, but they threaten almost all Indigenous ecosystem areas, and New Zealand's particularly vulnerable to this in part due to a high ratio of introduced to native taxa, few barriers to naturalization, and our status as a bird country. As casual and naturalized plants can be candidate weed species, looking at their traits could potentially be part of predicting which ones are more likely to become environmental weeds, and these could then be managed at lower densities. Management difficulty and costs both increase, and the possibility of eradication decreases rapidly as population expands. So it's optimal both in terms of time and resource to manage right at the bottom of the pest growth curve before explosion. With the 70 species, I used a range of global and regional databases and flora and other sites. My kind of main database that I started with was the TRY plant trait database. And this is a global trait base that synthesizes a bunch of other databases and data sets. So it's massive, and that was super useful, but it also left me with a bunch of gaps. So I used some regional databases like Austraits, Sprott, Plateus database, Plants for a Future, a bunch of different flora, and I also made a couple of genus and family-wide generalizations about fruit type. So I found that a lot of the species were not present in most sources, and you can see this in the data completeness that I was able to achieve. So I had between 50 and 79% completeness depending on the trait, and I was only able to find all three trait values for 37% of the species. It was very time consuming to go through databases, more than I was expecting, and I ran into the law of diminishing returns as I was accruing more sources. I also ran into some issues with changing taxonomy, accessibility, geographic bias of the data, and phenotypic plasticity, especially in shade tolerance. And this kind of highlights the completeness and issues are in line with database use in general, and highlight issues of meaningful accessibility and also lack of incentives for researchers to contribute to databases. Within the data that I did find, I saw that recently naturalized species tend to be animal dispersed, dry fruited, and shade intolerant. And the majority were either potentially bird dispersed or confirmed to be bird dispersed. And the traits of concern, which are bolded on the right, are bird dispersal, fleshy fruitedness, and shade tolerance. Bird dispersal and fleshy fruitedness both mean that species are more likely to become invasive, whereas shade tolerance reflects higher impact, including on intact forest ecosystems, especially when together with bird dispersal. Thank you, and thank you to the Kane Stanley Lab Group and everyone who I did field work with and asked a bunch of questions to.
Questions for Amy? What do you see as the most promising use for the data that you've collected? Like, where would you like to see it taken up further?
Good question. Probably in Keiko's PhD. So I was working with her, and she's also going to be looking at key perch sites to monitor seed levels from bird excrement.